Will isn't just some lofty spiritual concept floating above your head. It's the core engine of your being. Carl Jung might have called it a driving force behind individuation, but let's keep it grounded. Will is what keeps you walking when your legs are shaking, what keeps your hands steady when fear creeps in. Unlike your thoughts, your emotions, or even your physical body, will is unshakable. It's not a reaction to the world. It's a decision about how you're going to meet the world. You don't feel will. You choose it every single time, and it chooses you back. Now think about this. Your emotions can pull you in 5 different directions in a single afternoon. One moment you're fired up, next you're doubting everything. That's not will. Will doesn't fluctuate. It's not based on what's happening outside of you, or even inside your emotional weather system. It's the silent axis of your being, the eye in the hurricane. It holds steady while everything else spins. This is why ancient traditions, from the Bhagavad Gita to Stoicism, emphasize unwavering purpose. They weren't just being poetic. They were pointing to a deeper truth. Will is your anchor. Let's be honest. Our culture doesn't really talk about will. We talk about dreams, desires, motivation. But will? That's too raw, too fierce, too committed. And that's precisely the point. Will doesn't care if you're in the mood or not. It doesn't rely on excitement or some morning affirmation with herbal tea. It shows up after the enthusiasm fades. You see it in athletes who train through injury, in single mothers who push through exhaustion, in every underdog who refuses to lay down. That's the will at work. Here's something practical. Start watching where your energy goes. Are you feeding your emotional whims or building the muscle of constancy? When you say, I want to get in shape, and then skip the gym because you're tired, will isn't driving. But when you go despite the tiredness, that's will sharpening itself. Read books like The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield or Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Those are works forged in the fire of will. They don't romanticize the journey. They honor it. Will isn't a feeling, it's a force. And when harnessed, it's the single most transformative power a human can access. Not charisma, not talent. Will. That inner voltage that turns a fragile intention into an unstoppable movement. Once someone gets a taste of that, there's no going back. They stop begging the world to be easier and start getting stronger. And that's when something remarkable happens. The universe, in its strange and subtle way, begins to hand them the sword. Symbolism of Excalibur and will. Excalibur wasn't just a fancy sword for a chosen king. It was a message wrapped in myth. Pulled from stone or rising from water, its origin always symbolized something beyond brute strength. Carl Jung would call it an archetype of the higher self. But let's make it simple. Excalibur is will in its purest form, noble, untouched by ego, shining above the swamp of material desires. When King Arthur raised it, it wasn't his arm doing the work. It was his alignment with a deeper spiritual will that made him worthy. Not because he was strong, but because he was true. That water Excalibur rises from, that's no accident. Water is fluid, ever-changing, just like our emotions, cravings, and moods. But the sword? It's solid, sharp, unwavering. So when Excalibur emerges from the lake, it's the will rising above emotional noise. It's saying, yeah, the world is chaotic, but here's your focus. Here's your edge. In every fairy tale, myth, or initiation rite, the magical weapon appears only to those who are ready. Not ready by strength, but by alignment. Excalibur doesn't choose those who want power. It chooses those who've purified their intent. Look around today, and you'll see people swimming in their own emotional waters, desperately grabbing at anything that floats. They confuse excitement for purpose, status for meaning, noise for direction. But will isn't loud. It's the silent hand that reaches into the lake and knows exactly what it's pulling out. You don't need Excalibur to feel this. Just recall a moment when you acted with full integrity, no matter the cost. That calm, focused, decisive force, that was your will. And it's still there, waiting for your hand. Want something practical? Write down one action you've been postponing because of fear, doubt, or not being ready. Then do it, not when it feels right, but because it is right. That's how Excalibur gets forged in the real world, through right action despite inner chaos. Pick up The Once and Future King by T.H. White if you want to feel the myth breathe. But don't read it like fantasy. Read it like a mirror. Your will is the sword. Your life, the quest. The real Arthurian tale isn't about ruling kingdoms. It's about ruling yourself. The throne means nothing without the sword. And the sword is just a lump of steel unless it's wielded by someone who knows why they're holding it. The world will always test your grip with temptations and trials. But if your hand doesn't tremble, what else might rise from the deep? Will versus desire. Here's the trap most people fall into. They think will is just a fancier word for desire. I will do this sounds poetic, but underneath it's often just another craving wearing a tuxedo. Carl Jung taught that confusion between archetypes causes inner conflict. And this is a big one. Will is not desire. Desire says, I want that. Will says, this must be done. One is about gratification. The other is about purpose. Desire is emotional. Will is intentional. And when the two get mixed up, people chase shiny things, mistaking them for destiny. Let's be real. Desire is a trickster. It changes costumes, shifts voices, whispers sweet nothings in your ear. One day it wants success, the next it wants escape. Will doesn't play that game. It's not interested in how you feel right now. It's concerned with where you must go, even if the road sucks. That's why discipline and order feel unnatural at first. They're the tools of will, not desire. If you've ever set a New Year's resolution and dropped it by February, guess which one was in charge? Now, desire isn't evil. It's part of human nature. It makes us dream, explore, expand. But it's not reliable. It's like a firework, impressive for a moment, then gone. Will, though? Will is like the sun. It rises every day, whether you're excited or not. The difference lies in permanence. Spiritual traditions call this the path of the self versus the path of the ego. The self aligns with will. The ego chases desire. And most suffering comes from trying to live a purposeful life while being led by whims. Try this. Next time you feel pulled towards something, whether it's a new opportunity, relationship, or impulse, ask yourself, is this a true direction or just a dopamine hit? Practice journaling this difference for a week. Patterns will emerge. Will is quiet and firm. Desire is loud and fleeting. That's how you train discernment. And read Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke if you want a taste of what longing with purpose feels like. Not fantasy, but focused yearning. Here's the catch that most people miss. True will often looks boring at first. It doesn't dance. It doesn't sparkle, but it endures. And in a world addicted to dopamine and applause, endurance is revolutionary. That's the kind of fire that forges real transformation. And it's only the beginning of the strength required to actually do something with that inner force. Power of willpower. You've probably heard people say, I just don't have the motivation. But motivation is like weather, unpredictable, moody, and completely unreliable when a storm hits. Willpower, on the other hand, is the inner compass that keeps you moving even when the path disappears. Carl Jung would say it's the psychic energy of the self pushing through resistance. And let's be honest, life doesn't care about your plans. It throws chaos at your face. That's when willpower becomes your only real ally. Not passion, not rage, just pure, conscious direction. Most people mistake strong emotion for willpower. They think being fired up or angry will carry them through. But those are sparks, not engines. The real magic is in lucidity, being clear about what matters, and calmly persistent in pursuing it. Perseverance isn't glamorous. It looks like showing up to the gym after a sleepless night, like editing that manuscript no one's read yet, like holding your integrity in a room full of liars. That's willpower in motion, not flashy, just relentless. Here's a practical tip. Choose one small habit you've abandoned or delayed. Maybe it's daily reading, early waking, or walking after meals. Start doing it consistently. No skipping, no justifying. The goal isn't the task itself, it's the strengthening of your will. Like muscles, willpower grows under resistance. A great book to explore this is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Not because it's trendy, but because it helps you master the boring, which is where true willpower thrives. The culture won't help you here. It sells you shortcuts, 10 hacks to change your life. But change doesn't come from hacks. It comes from discipline. That's why legends aren't built on motivation. They're carved from consistency. Think of Nelson Mandela or Viktor Frankl. Their strength didn't come from excitement. It came from constancy, rooted in something deeper than circumstance, something immovable. That's what made their will sacred. Willpower is less about force and more about fidelity to a vision, a value, a vow. And the more you act from this place, the more your nervous system learns to obey your soul instead of your cravings. That's when something truly powerful awakens. Not just a new habit, but a new self. And the real test? It comes when everything around you starts pulling in the opposite direction. Cultural weakening of will. Modern culture doesn't just ignore will, it actively sabotages it. From every corner, you're told to chase comfort, choose ease, and avoid friction at all costs. The algorithm feeds you dopamine hits, and the education system rewards compliance, not courage. Carl Jung might argue this is the collective unconscious turning against individuation, against true growth. The result? A generation of people with crushed dreams and fragile identities. Not because they're weak by nature, but because their will was never invited to wake up. We live in what could be called a factory of weakness. It produces people trained to avoid pain, chase excitement, and outsource their choices to influencers, gurus, or political tribes. Strength of will becomes the rare exception, not the expectation. Want to see it clearly? Watch how society reacts to someone with discipline and vision. They're often mocked as rigid, obsessive, or even toxic. That's not a judgment. That's a warning. Because if we shame strength and glorify passivity, we dig a graveyard of unrealized potential. Here's a simple exercise to see where your will's being drained. Track your daily decisions. How many are made from genuine intention? And how many are knee-jerk reactions to comfort or fear? How often do you say yes just to avoid conflict? Or no, just to avoid effort? Awareness is the first crack in the shell. Books like The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon or Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman expose how massification dulls individual will and sharpens conformity. But here's the good news. Culture doesn't own your soul. You can reclaim it, not by running off to a cave or becoming a digital hermit, but by reintroducing resistance into your life on purpose. Cold showers, fasting, learning a hard skill without shortcuts. These aren't trends. They're weapons. Excalibur-level tools for forging a will that modernity forgot. Each act of discomfort you choose is a quiet rebellion against mass sedation. Because here's the hidden truth. Society fears the individual with will. Why? Because they can't be bought, bent, or broken. They don't beg for approval. They act from a deeper alignment. And that kind of person, they become dangerous, not in a destructive way, but in a transformative one. The kind who climbs when everyone else is slipping. The climber metaphor. Imagine a climber staring at a towering mountain, rope in hand, eyes fixed on the summit. That's all in action, clear, directed, unwavering. The rope represents the ideal, steady, anchored, unshaken by weather. The climber's hands? That's your daily effort. The slow, rhythmic pull upward mirrors how one moves through the world. Not with frenzy, not with leaps, but with disciplined descent. Carl Jung would call this symbolic movement the journey of individuation. a self climbing toward its highest potential, one step at a time. Most people, though, don't climb. They wander. They start scaling a wall, then switch to another the moment the grip slips. They confuse variety with progress. But real will isn't interested in novelty. It's obsessed with direction. The climber doesn't change mountains because the wind blows. He adjusts his stance, tightens his grip, and keeps climbing. That's the model. That's how great lives are built. Through thousands of small, deliberate movements aligned to a fixed purpose. Want something tangible? Choose a goal. Any goal that you've touched and dropped 100 times. Write it down. Now, instead of sprinting toward it with emotion, plan the climb. Set micro tasks. Make them boring. Do one every day. Track the progress like a mountaineer maps each anchor point. Books like Grit by Angela Duckworth can be helpful, but your real teacher will be the habit you don't want to do on a rainy day. That's the moment your will gets forged. The metaphor goes deeper. Sometimes you slip. Sometimes the rope burns your hand or your muscles scream. That's not failure. It's feedback. The mountain isn't your enemy. It's your mirror. Every struggle reveals whether you're climbing for glory or for growth. Are you climbing to impress someone or because that summit calls you? Because that's what will listens to, the call. Not applause, not comfort, just a call. And here's the punchline most folks miss. The higher you climb, the quieter it gets. No more crowds, no more noise, just the wind in your breath and that steady pull. That's where true power lives, in the solitude of sustained effort. And just when you think the climb will never end, something shifts. Sophistry of doubt. Doubt has its place, but like fire, it needs a boundary. It's a useful tool when applied to methods, strategies, or tactics. But when it seeps into your purpose, it rots everything. Carl Jung warned that when we question the very meaning of our journey, we risk fragmentation of the psyche. And here's the real issue. Most people don't doubt how they'll get there. They start doubting if they should even try. That's when will collapses. Not because it was weak, but because its roots were eaten by indecision. Think of the mind like a courtroom. Doubt walks in dressed like a genius, slick, charming, full of what-ifs and but-maybes. But here's the twist. It rarely offers real solutions. It just stalls action. It paralyzes. This is the sophistry of doubt. It sounds intellectual, but it's cowardice in disguise. You'll hear it in phrases like, maybe I'm not cut out for this, or what if it's all meaningless? Those aren't questions. They're traps. They don't sharpen your path. They erase it. Here's a way to fight back. Write down your why, your core purpose, your unshakable north. And every time doubt shows up, point to it. Loudly. This is how soldiers in war stay grounded. They don't doubt the mission, only the method. Read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius if you need an iron spine. He questioned everything but his commitment to virtue and right action. That's the key. Doubt the route, not the reason. Let's get practical. Whenever you're about to quit something that matters, ask, am I doubting the method or the mission? If it's the method, great. Adjust. Innovate. But if it's the mission, pause. Reconnect. Reaffirm. Because once doubt poisons the root, no amount of energy can save the fruit. That's why so many brilliant minds stay stuck. They never learn to separate questions from quitting. And when you finally recognize that what can coexist with uncertainty, but never with surrender, you start walking differently. Not arrogantly, but firmly. Not because you know everything, but because you know enough. And the next challenge that rises on the horizon, well, it's not meant to break you. It's meant to test just how deeply your will is anchored. Ideals versus projects. Most people treat their goals like fashion trends. Hot one month, forgotten the next. But there's a difference, a sacred difference between projects and ideals. Carl Jung would say that ideals reside in the realm of archetypes. They're timeless, enduring, rooted in the self. Projects? They're just the vehicles. They come and go. When people confuse the two, they suffer. Why? Because the inevitable failure of a project feels like the death of purpose. But true will doesn't die with a failed plan. It adapts, because it knows the ideal is what truly matters. Imagine someone wants to help children in poverty. That's the ideal. Now, maybe they launch a nonprofit or start a school or even create online content. Those are the projects. If one project fails, the will behind the ideal remains untouched. But if they identify their soul with that single plan, they'll crumble when it hits a wall. This is why it's essential to separate form from essence. Don't confuse the ship with the destination. The ship might sink. The island is still there. Here's something practical. Define your top 3 ideals. Not your goals, your whys. Maybe it's truth, justice, healing, awakening, beauty. Write them down. Look at your current projects. Are they aligned? If not, you've found a reason for your burnout, confusion, or lack of joy. When your will serves a living ideal, even obstacles feel meaningful. Read Man's Search for Meaning again if you need reminding. Viktor Frankl's ideal gave his soul light even in a concentration camp. Projects die, meaning doesn't. This is where the culture plays tricks again. It tells you to chase outcomes, followers, money, results. But outcomes are fragile. They bend and break under pressure. Ideals? They bend you into something stronger, into someone clearer, someone who can try 10 times and still show up for the 11th, because the flame inside hasn't dimmed. That's how Will walks, not by metrics, but by meaning. And when you operate from that place, something profound happens. The world no longer defines your worth. Success doesn't inflate you, and failure doesn't destroy you. You become unmoved, not numb, but rooted. And from that root, another force begins to stir, one far more rare than people realize. Excitement versus enthusiasm. Let's get one thing straight. Excitement is cheap. It's loud, flashy, addictive, and it burns out fast. Enthusiasm, on the other hand, is divine. The word itself comes from entheos, meaning God within. Carl Jung would say excitement belongs to the ego. It craves attention, novelty, stimulation. Enthusiasm comes from the self. It's rooted in purpose, depth, and meaning. You could get excited about a new app, a vacation, or a trending challenge. But you're enthusiastic about a mission, about something that makes your soul hum quietly for years. Most people confuse the two. They start a new habit with excitement and expect that fire to last. It doesn't, because it's not supposed to. Excitement is a starter spark. It's not the fuel. When it fades, people panic. Maybe I'm not meant for this, they think. But that's the moment enthusiasm should begin. It's the shift from thrill to commitment. That subtle, sturdy flame that says, I'm still here, day after day. That's what Will feeds on. Not hype, but sacred repetition. Want a practical filter? Ask yourself, would I still do this if no one ever praised me for it? If the answer is yes, you've found enthusiasm. Try journaling about something you've loved for years, something that gives you energy even without recognition. That's the trailhead. Books like The Prophet by Khalil Gibran or Letters to a Young Poet touch this frequency. They don't scream, they glow. And glow is what keeps you going when the crowd disappears. The danger is when we live excitement-chasing lives. We jump from trend to trend, job to job, person to person, never staying long enough to dig roots. The culture rewards this surface-level glow-up, but the soul starves on such a diet. Enthusiasm, though quiet, nourishes deeply. It builds constancy. It grows like a tree, trunk thickens with each season, imperceptibly but powerfully. And here's the beauty. When you finally stop chasing excitement and embrace the quiet force of enthusiasm, your actions become sacred rituals. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're aligned. And from that place, you begin to hear silence, one that doesn't scare you anymore, but beckons with strange familiarity. Hierarchy of human motivations. We're not just minds walking around on legs, we're layered beings. Like a Russian nesting doll, we've got bodies, emotions, thoughts, but beneath all that, there's will. It sits deeper than moods, louder than thoughts, and more enduring than bodily urges. Carl Jung spoke of the self as the organizing center of the psyche, and will is its executive arm. It's the silent general orchestrating your energies towards something higher. Most people never dig deep enough to meet it. They live in the outer layers, reacting, desiring, overthinking, never directing. Here's how it plays out. Your body screams for rest, your emotions beg for attention, your thoughts spin in circles. But if will is awake, it calmly says, we move. That doesn't mean you ignore pain. It means you order it. You align the whole orchestra of your being around a central melody. Will gives each part a role without letting anyone hijack the whole. Without it, you become a fragmented mess of impulses. With it, you're a force of nature, precise, focused, alive. Try this exercise. Next time you're torn between comfort and growth, pause and name which part of you is speaking. Is it fear in the emotional body? A limiting belief in the mental field? Fatigue in the physical? Then ask, what will say? Write the answers. That space between the voices is where power is born. Books like The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer explore this beautifully. The difference between the voice in your head and the one watching the whole play. It's also why most people can't stay consistent. They're letting lower energies steer the ship. They wait to feel like it. But what doesn't wait, it leads. And when it leads, all other parts begin to sync up. Your energy sharpens. Your emotions mature. Your body adapts. That's when discipline stops feeling like a cage and starts feeling like freedom. Not forced obedience, but voluntary alignment. And that alignment, it opens the door to something rare. A feeling that doesn't come from achievement or applause. A presence, a clarity, a sense that something ancient and timeless is flowing through you. Not because you sought it, but because you finally got quiet enough to hear it. Voice of silence and self-recognition. There's a quiet place inside you that's been whispering your whole life. Not yelling, not persuading, just being. Carl Jung called it the self, a timeless center beyond your ever-shifting thoughts, emotions, and roles. Most people never meet this voice because they're too busy reacting to the noise outside or the drama inside. But when everything falls apart, when the relationship ends, the job dissolves, the identity crumbles, that's often when the silence becomes audible. And suddenly, they realize it was always there. This voice doesn't speak in words. It shows up as clarity. A strange calm when you should be panicking. A steady knowing when logic can't explain why. It's the part of you untouched by time. It was there when you were 5. It'll be there when you're 80. It doesn't care who you impress. It's not interested in trends. It's not even moved by failure. Because it knows something your mind forgets daily, that you are not your circumstances. You are the one moving through them. A great way to tap into this voice is through solitude. Not loneliness, but intentional silence. Try walking alone without music, sitting without distraction. Ask, who am I if I do nothing? Say nothing, prove nothing. That's when the voice of silence stirs. Read The Voice of the Silence by Helena Blavatsky if you dare. It's not an easy read, but it opens strange doors. Not logical ones, mystical ones. And those are often the most revealing. You'll start to notice something wild. When you connect with that silent core, your need for approval fades. Not because you become arrogant, but because you finally recognize your own presence. You don't need mirrors when you remember your face. That's where real self-recognition lives. Not in affirmation, but in awareness. Not in identity, but in essence. And once you've tasted that essence, even for a moment, you realize that most of what you chase in life is just noise. Echoes, shadows. But there's something else, a force rising quietly behind your ribs like a compass. And that force, well, it doesn't need to shout, because the moment you trust it, everything else begins to rearrange. Examples of will in history. History doesn't remember the comfortable. It remembers the committed, the ones who move forward when everything said stop. Think about Joan of Arc, a teenage girl, untrained, unarmed, declaring divine purpose in a world of kings and warriors. Carl Jung would see her as a living embodiment of archetypal will, tapping into something far beyond personal ambition. She didn't fight because she was fearless. She fought because something deeper than fear was louder. That's what real will looks like. Not emotionless, just anchored. Will always walks alone before it walks with others. It's in those private moments when no one believes in you, when even you start to question your own sanity, that will become steel. Look at Gandhi, or Malala, or even the unknown mother raising 3 kids on a janitor's paycheck. They all operate from that same place, a silent must in their chest. They didn't wait for certainty. They moved through the fog, letting each step light the next. That's not magic. That's clarity plus courage equals will. Here's something practical. Study biographies, not just memes. Read Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. Watch documentaries about people who chose conviction over convenience. Let their lives remind you that greatness isn't born, it's built. Often in silence, often in secret, often through years of rejection, failure, and loss. But the ones who stay the course, they didn't just make history. They became living proof that will bend history. That's why you don't need to be rich, loud, or popular to be powerful. You need to be aligned. You need to recognize that there's a deeper order, a silent current, that rewards those who move with integrity, even when it hurts. Well, it doesn't ask for applause. It only asks for movement. And it moves through you when you finally decide that no external storm could drown your inner flame. And it's from that flame that true legacy is born. Not the kind etched in statues, but the kind etched in souls. In those you touch, in those who see you persist and suddenly remember their own forgotten fire. That's when it spreads. That's when the real work begins. Misidentification and self-mastery. Most people live like passengers in a runaway car. One moment they're driven by emotion, the next by thought, then by impulse, then by fear. Carl Jung called this identification with the persona or the mask we wear. But it goes deeper. When you become your anger, your sadness, or your confusion, you lose your power. You forget you're the driver, not the wheel. And that's where we'll get hijacked, when the self forgets it's in control and starts believing every passing storm is the sky itself. Self-mastery starts with one essential skill, misidentification. Not dissociation, not suppression, just the recognition that you're not your passing states. You have a body, but you are not it. You feel emotions, but you are not them. You think thoughts, but you're the one observing them. This awareness is the throne. And the moment you sit on it, everything changes. You start responding, not reacting. Leading, not leaking. And that's when we can finally breathe. Here's a useful practice. When a strong emotion hits, say out loud, "There is anger," instead of "I am angry." Try with fear, with doubt. That small shift in language builds psychological distance. It reminds you who's actually home. Books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle and Inner Engineering by Sadhguru are loaded with insights on this principle because they point to a deeper truth. Mastery is internal order, not external control. Of course, this kind of clarity isn't easy in a world screaming for your attention. Everything is designed to trigger identification, ads that stir desire, media that amplifies fear, systems that reward impulsiveness. That's why detachment isn't coldness, it's survival. It's how the self stays sovereign in a world built to colonize your mind. When you master misidentification, you stop being a puppet. You start being a person, one with direction, dignity, and depth. And from that depth, what reclaims the throne. No longer pulled in a dozen directions, no longer whispered over by emotions. It stands up, and when it doesn't need to shout. It simply moves. And that movement, it begins to shape not just your life, but the very energy you radiate into the world. True power and virtue. Power itself is neutral. It's just raw energy, like fire. What matters is who's holding the flame and why. Carl Jung understood that the unconscious doesn't differentiate between good and evil. It only wants wholeness. That's why the same discipline that builds a saint can also build a tyrant. Order, efficiency, courage. These are virtues, but they're not automatically virtuous. A mafia boss can be more organized and strategic than a monk. The difference? The direction of the will. This is where things get uncomfortable. Society assumes good intentions are enough. But they're not. Weakness, when paired with goodness, doesn't create virtue. It creates naivety. Real virtue requires strength, willpower, discipline. Without them, goodness becomes wishful thinking. That's why noble people often fail to make impact. They lack the fire to move mountains. Meanwhile, others with darker motives succeed. Not because of evil magic, but because they're simply more committed to their cause. Want proof? Look at organized crime, or even historical regimes that rose through ruthlessly applied principles. They used strategy, unity, and relentless effort. It wasn't chaos, it was order. And that order, even when applied to destructive ends, produced real-world results. Now, imagine what would happen if the same structure was applied to something truly noble. That's the missing piece. The union of virtue and power, of heart and will. Here's a practical reflection. Ask yourself, where am I being good but not effective? Are there causes you believe in but never act on? Values you hold but don't embody? The fix isn't more sensitivity, it's more strength. Read The Republic by Plato or The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. These aren't just philosophical texts. They're blueprints for merging inner clarity with outer precision. Because when will and virtue shake hands, something rare is born. Not just a nice person, but a force of transformation. Someone who doesn't crumble in conflict. Someone who can build. And from that place of integrated strength, a new kind of action becomes possible. Rejection of weakness and massification. Let's be blunt. There's a growing cult of weakness out there. A cultural celebration of fragility, victimhood, and mediocrity. And it's not compassion, it's corrosion. Carl Jung warned that the shadow, when denied and projected, distorts collective behavior. Today, that distortion looks like glorifying helplessness and attacking those who choose discipline. We've flipped the script. Strength is toxic, while apathy is authentic. But that narrative doesn't build civilization. It builds collapse. Massification is the byproduct of this mindset. It's when individuals dissolve into the crowd, surrendering will in exchange for validation. The group becomes God. Original thought is dangerous. Excellence is elitist. So people shrink, blend in, obey. And what's lost in this fog? Human dignity. The silent pride of standing tall even when no one's watching. You weren't born to disappear into the algorithm. You were born to stand out. But that takes will. That takes heat. And yes, it takes risk. Here's a challenge. This week, do one thing that makes you stronger, but makes you unpopular. Say no when it's easier to say yes. Speak truth in a room full of silence. Train your body when no one's watching. These small acts rewire you. They remind you that you're not here to be liked. You're here to live. Books like Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson are lifelines in this sea of sameness. Let them remind you that conformity is not community. It's erasure. Rejecting weakness doesn't mean hating the vulnerable. It means refusing to worship vulnerability as virtue. Compassion is vital, but it must be paired with courage. Otherwise, we raise generations who can spot microaggressions but can't survive macro reality. Life isn't soft, and pretending doesn't protect us, it weakens us. Strength isn't cruelty. It's capacity. The capacity to endure, create, protect, and rise. And when you stop making excuses for why you can't, shouldn't, or won't, you start to tap into something raw, ancient, electric, the force that every myth, every hero's journey, every Phoenix from Ashes story is secretly pointing to. Impact of virtue misuse. Here's a hard truth. Evil often wins because it's better organized. That sounds harsh, but history backs it up. Carl Jung would argue that the shadow, when repressed, finds expression in the collective. And when that shadow gains discipline, it becomes terrifyingly effective. Look at organized crime syndicates, corrupt governments, authoritarian cults. They don't succeed through chaos. They succeed through structure, strategy, virtue twisted and weaponized, while the good often remain fragmented, disorganized, and passive. It's uncomfortable to admit, but the disciplined villain often outpaces the disoriented hero. That's not a moral failure. It's a will failure. Too many people think being nice is enough. It's not. Niceness without power is easily overrun. And this is where the battle is lost, not in values, but in execution. The side willing to work harder, stay longer, sacrifice more, wins. And if we don't like who's winning, maybe it's time to examine how much effort the good guys are actually putting in. Take any mafia documentary, and you'll see systems, code, loyalty, hierarchies, rituals. It's not the chaos you'd expect. It's chillingly efficient. Now compare that to activist circles that burn out from infighting, or idealists who never get past the brainstorm phase. The message isn't to copy criminals. It's to reclaim virtue as power. Because when discipline, order, and will serve light, they become unstoppable. They build movements that last. Here's something to reflect on. Where in your life are you avoiding structure because it feels too rigid? Where are your ideals begging for a bit more backbone? Try reading the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Not to dominate others, but to understand the mindset that turns potential into power. Because those who don't study structure are often ruled by those who do. And once you realize that virtues like discipline and order are not just tools of the system, but sacred weapons in the hands of the righteous, the entire game shifts. The battlefield is no longer about who's more moral. It's about who's more committed. And from that place of commitment, something ancient begins to stir in the hearts of the young. Youth, heroism, and attraction to strength. Young people aren't drawn to goodness. They're drawn to greatness. If society fails to offer noble heroes who embody strength, courage, and will, the youth will idolize the boldest alternative, no matter how dark. Carl Jung understood this as the psyche's longing for archetypes, the warrior, the king, the sage. And if those archetypes are absent in the culture, they return distorted through villains, rebels, or influencers with no soul but plenty of charisma. It's not rebellion. It's a hunger for power with purpose. This is why empty moral preaching doesn't work. You can smell hypocrisy from a mile away. They want examples, not lectures. They want to feel that fire of possibility, that spark of transformation, that refusal to bow to mediocrity. And if they don't see it in the good guys, they'll find it in rappers, gangsters, cult leaders, or rogues. It's not because they're bad. It's because they're wired to seek strength. The problem isn't their hunger. It's our lack of offering anything worth biting into. If you're a parent, teacher, or leader, show your fire. Don't just preach peace. Show perseverance, discipline, vision. Talk about the days you wanted to quit, but didn't. Show them will in action, not just kindness in theory. Recommend The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. It's not just mythology, it's a guidebook for the soul's evolution. Youth don't need comfort. They need calls to adventure. And you'd be shocked at how ready they are to answer. One practical shift: Stop rewarding safety and start praising effort. When a young person dares to try, even if they fail, celebrate that boldness. That's how you ignite will. That's how you raise warriors, not worriers. The world already has enough people waiting for permission. What it needs are initiators, those who stand tall and walk first. Especially when it's unpopular. Especially when it's hard. Because once young people see that strength doesn't have to be cruel, and that power can serve love, everything changes. They stop chasing shadows and start becoming a light. And from that spark, a new kind of legacy begins to take shape. Legacy and the power of tracks left behind. Legacy isn't about what you do once. It's about what remains when you're gone. And that, my friend, is where will leaves its mark. Carl Jung would call it the individuation process crystallized, a life whose actions weren't just reactions, but statements. Not loud declarations, but quiet trails carved into time. Think of people like Leonardo da Vinci, Viktor Frankl, or Rosa Parks. They didn't just exist. They left tracks. You can feel their will echoing through generations. Here's the catch. Most people die with their music still in them. Not because they lack talent, but because they lack consistency. They chased dreams for a season, but abandoned them when things got hard. That's the graveyard of crushed dreams. Millions of unfinished projects, unwritten books, unspoken truths. Will is the difference between starting and staying, between a ripple and a wave. It's not about how loud your splash is, it's about how far it carries. Want a hard but necessary exercise? Ask yourself, if I disappeared today, what have I really left behind? Not in likes or resumes, but in impact. What values have you embodied so fiercely that they changed someone else's life? What actions will still echo years after you've stopped breathing? Books like Tuesdays with Morrie or Meditations confront this question head-on, not to depress you, but to awaken you. Because the time to build legacy isn't later. It's now. The trick is to stop chasing applause and start following alignment. When you act from will, you don't need external validation. You become a living example, a breathing map, the kind of person others remember, not because you were perfect, but because you were present, focused, real. That's the fingerprint will leaves on the world. It can't be faked and it can't be forgotten. And when you start to live like that, like every step matters, like every act echoes, you no longer ask, what's the point? You start asking, what will I leave behind? And once that question takes root, you'll start noticing something. Even your problems begin to feel different. Overcoming problems through will. Here's something most self-help gurus won't tell you. Understanding your problem doesn't fix it. You can analyze your trauma, dissect your habits, journal your shadows until the ink runs dry, and still feel stuck. Carl Jung acknowledged that awareness is crucial, but it's not the final step. It's just the beginning. Insight without action becomes a loop. Will is the bridge. It's what gets you out, not by erasing your pain, but by giving it direction. By saying, yes, this happened, but now I move. Think of it like a muddy field. You can study the mud, describe its texture, even trace where it came from, but unless you step, you're going nowhere. That's why many brilliant minds stay stagnant. They're too busy analyzing the mud instead of making the move. The will doesn't ask if you're ready. It asks if you're willing. There's a difference. One waits for perfection. The other steps forward imperfectly but decisively. Try this. Pick one problem you've been working on forever. Something you've read 5 books about. Now stop reading. Act. Move. Even if it's small, symbolic, messy. Movement creates momentum. The Japanese call this kaizen. Micro improvements with macro impact. Well, doesn't need drama. It needs motion. Read Do the Work by Stephen Pressfield if you want a swift kick. It's short, punchy, and built to bypass excuses. And here's a metaphor worth engraving. Your past is a footprint, not a prison. The shoe print is real, sure, but it's behind you. Well, looks forward. It sees the next step, not just the last scar. That's what makes it healing. Not because it undoes the past, but because it stops giving it the steering wheel. The past teaches, but only will leads. And when you start choosing forward motion, even with trembling hands and heavy feet, you'll notice something strange. Problems don't shrink. You grow. And as you grow, something almost magical begins to happen. Forces beyond logic start to gather at your back. Support from nature to the willful. It's a strange law of life. When you truly commit, the universe responds. Not immediately, not always visibly, but unmistakably. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to arrive right when the will aligns with purpose. Ancient traditions echo the same message. When a person walks the path with integrity and constancy, invisible hands begin to clear the way. Nature supports the committed, not the curious, not the dabblers, but the ones who decide. Fairy tales knew this before science did. The hero receives the magic weapon not before the journey, but after proving they're worthy. Excalibur doesn't appear to the wanderer. It rises for the one who chooses the hard road. The magic is never external. It's a mirror, a reflection of internal alignment. You don't manifest tools of transformation by wishing. You manifest them by walking through fire with your eyes open. Want proof? Start doing something hard for 30 days, consistently, without complaint. It could be a cold shower, a creative practice, a physical discipline. Around week 3, something weird happens. Opportunities emerge. People show up. Ideas connect. It's not magic, it's momentum. Life recognizes force. It responds to direction. And books like The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho speak this language well. When you want something, all the universe conspires, but the key isn't the want, it's the walk. Think about it. How many times did you wait for a sign when the real sign was waiting for you to act? Nature doesn't gamble. It invests in the trustworthy. When you show you're serious, life shows up. Maybe not with fireworks, but with flow. The right call, the sudden insight, the unexpected helper. It feels like luck, but it's earned. And from that place of earned synchronicity, you will stop feeling like a solo effort. You begin to sense something with you. Not a myth, not a metaphor, a living current that only flows when you commit to the climb. And with that wind at your back, a new kind of action becomes possible. Right action and pure will. Right action isn't always rewarded. It's not always seen. Sometimes it even costs you. But that's the point. It's not done for something. It's done because it's right. Carl Jung would call this alignment with the self, when the individual acts not from desire or fear, but from an inner moral compass rooted in something greater. This is the essence of pure will. When your actions are so aligned with higher truth that they no longer require external motivation. You move not to gain, but because your soul demands it. Take Yudhishthir from Mahabharata, king, warrior, sage. Faced with betrayal, exile, and war, he acted not out of vengeance, but out of dharma. Right action, even when it hurt, even when it meant walking alone. That's when its purest form, disinterested, unwavering, clean. And you don't have to be a mythic king to do this. Every time you tell the truth when it would have been easier to lie, every time you do the hard thing without needing credit, you're walking that same path. Here's something practical. Choose one situation this week where you would normally act out of convenience or self-interest and flip it. Do what's right, not what's easy. Don't post about it. Don't brag. Just do. Then observe what happens internally. A quiet strength begins to grow. A dignity that doesn't need applause. Books like Bhagavad Gita show this in action. Krishna's entire teaching to Arjuna is about right action without attachment to outcome. That's not religion. That's freedom. And don't confuse right action with moral superiority. It's not about being better than others. It's about being better than your own previous self. It's a private war, not a public performance. It refines your will like fire refines gold, by burning off the unnecessary, by stripping away the ego. What remains is something solid. something trustworthy, something pure. And once you start living like that, when you act from center, not from craving, you begin to experience a strange peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from knowing. And from that knowing, you start to rebuild something fragile and powerful at the same time. Building self-trust through fulfilled promises. Every time you break a promise to yourself, something in you dies a little. Not loudly, not all at once, but subtly, like a wire fraying under pressure. Carl Jung emphasized the importance of inner congruence, of living in alignment with the self. When your actions contradict your own word, you fracture that alignment. And over time, your psyche starts believing something dangerous. I can't trust myself. That's how it erodes. Not through grand failure, but through tiny betrayals stacked daily. Most people think confidence is about charisma or talent. It's not. It's built from self-trust, one fulfilled promise at a time. Want to feel powerful? Start with something small. Promise to wake up at 6 a.m. and do it. Promise to skip the junk food and skip it. Not for the world, for you. Because each time you keep a word to yourself, you reinforce the bridge between intention and action. That bridge is will. And when it's strong, you become unstoppable. Try this. Write down 3 promises to yourself for the next 7 days. Not goals, promises. Small, clear, doable. Maybe it's reading 10 pages, walking for 15 minutes, or journaling before bed. Keep them sacred. Don't negotiate. Then watch what happens. Your energy shifts. Your confidence grows. You stop seeking external validation because you've become your own ally again. Books like Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins drive this point home in the most raw, no excuse kind of way. And here's the truth most avoid. You don't need another motivational speech. You need evidence. Evidence that you do what you say. Evidence that your will can be trusted. And that evidence doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from showing up again and again, especially when no one is watching. Especially when you don't feel like it. Because when you rebuild that inner alliance, when your word starts carrying weight again, something sacred happens. Your will stops feeling like a theory and starts feeling like a force. And with that force awakened, the question is no longer, can I, but what am I called to do? And from that calling, a deeper urgency begins to stir. Philosophical urgency of awakening the will. Philosophy isn't just about abstract thought, it's about urgent action. Carl Jung didn't study symbols and myths to sound smart at dinner parties. He did it to awaken the will, to reconnect individuals with a force capable of transforming not just their minds, but their entire lives. And yet, modern philosophy often feels like mental gymnastics, clever but sterile. The truth is, knowledge without application is spiritual constipation. Awakening the will is the philosophical emergency of our age. Most people are drowning in information, but starving for transformation. They read, scroll, consume, but don't move. The will stays dormant. That's why our age feels so hollow. We know everything, yet change nothing. But real philosophy isn't about having the answers. It's about asking the right questions, then having the courage to live them. Rainer Maria Rilke once said, live the questions now. Will is how you live the question. It's not pondering. It's pressing forward. Here's a challenge that flips the game. For every insight you gain, apply one action. Learn about stillness. Practice silence for 10 minutes. Learn about self-discipline. Cut one indulgence this week. This is how philosophy becomes fire. Books like Letters from a Stoic by Seneca and The Way of the Superior Man by David Data don't just inform, they ignite. Because once you feel the fire of your own will, you realize thought is only half the journey. The other half is movement. And here's the kicker. The more you awaken your will, the more your life starts to demand meaning. Superficiality becomes unbearable. Comfort turns boring. You crave alignment. You crave depth. You crave action that matters. That's why awakening the will isn't a side quest. It's the core mission. Everything else, discipline, clarity, courage, flows from it. Without it, you're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. So if your life feels stuck, dry, or directionless, ask yourself this. When was the last time I acted from pure intent? Not fear, not approval, but truth? That question burns. And from its heat, something final and formidable begins to emerge. Human life and will. Without will, life becomes a slow burial of possibilities. Dreams are conceived, but never born. Plans are made, but never executed. Carl Jung warned of the dangers of a life unlived, of the psychic death that occurs when a person betrays their inner calling. That's what happens when will is ignored. The fire dims, the eyes dull. Life becomes a museum of what could have been, not because fate was cruel, but because action was delayed, repeatedly, until it was too late. But when will awakens, the world shifts. Life regains its pulse. You stop waiting to be rescued and start becoming the rescuer. It's not about achieving everything. It's about engaging everything. Fully, fiercely, honestly. That's where meaning is born. Not from comfort, but from commitment. When you live with will, you make peace with the fact that you won't win every battle, but you'll die standing. And that matters more than most will ever understand. Want to know what separates a fulfilled life from a wasted one? It's not luck. It's not intelligence. It's whether or not you showed up for your own becoming. Whether or not you refused to let excuses become identity. Whether or not you stopped blaming the system, your parents, the algorithm, and finally said, I will. That's the moment everything changes. Because once you take radical ownership, life stops being something that happens to you. It becomes something you build. Try this now. Write a eulogy, not from someone else's voice, but from your own. Not about what you did, but who you became, who you decided to be, what forces you chose to serve. Make it real. Let it sting. Then ask, am I walking that path today? If not, start. Small. Relentless. That's how cemeteries become cathedrals. When lives are lived with will so strong, even death has to bow to their legacy. Because here's the truth, you will die. But the question is, will your dreams die with you or because of you? And if they don't, if your will lights even one path for someone else, then maybe, just maybe, you've already won. If you've made it this far, you already know this wasn't just a video. It was a wake-up call, not to inspire you for a day, but to challenge you for life. The world doesn't need more knowledge hoarders. It needs warriors of will, people who choose alignment over applause, discipline over distraction, right action over comfortable decay. So now the spotlight turns to you. What will you do with this? Will this be just another insight you file away, or the spark that sets your entire direction ablaze? Ask yourself, where have you been betraying your own word? Where has your potential been quietly suffocating under the weight of delay and doubt? Are you willing to look that version of yourself in the eye and say, enough? Because the moment you decide to act from will, not emotion, not hype, but that silent inner compass, your life begins to reshape itself. Not overnight, but unmistakably, like a mountain rising, inch by inch, until no one can ignore it anymore. So here's the challenge. Don't just close this video and scroll on. Make a vow to yourself to become the kind of person whose life is proof that will exist. And if you're ready to keep unlocking this kind of knowledge and power, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and join the movement. Because this isn't just about philosophy. It's about transformation. And we're just getting started.